Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever and whenever you're watching us. Welcome to Conical Supremacy. We have a really cool show for you today, and it's a little bit out of the ordinary. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm John Noreko, and I have my lovely co-host here, Mr. Doug Tornquist. And today we're doing something a little bit out of the ordinary, aren't we?
We are, but I think it's high time we did it. I've been wanting to do this ever since we started this. And what we have today is we have a recital. We have a doctoral recital from a grad student I've been working with at USC. And, this live stream format has become very important to us this past year because we discovered it's a way to reach a lot more people than we could just playing a regular concert, even though, there's still the thrill of a live performance. But the reality is, at least for us here in Southern California, there aren't any rooms open for us.
Yeah, not yet. I mean, no, it's kind of sad, and those that are open aren't really something that this type of stuff can be done in.
Well, usually a recital takes place in a smaller venue because, for a tuba recital, we're lucky to get 30 to 40 people. So that means a small auditorium on a classroom, a rehearsal room, or a church. Or just any sort of small venue, and they're still not open to us just because the organizations are still wrestling with the protocols.
Well, what you bring up that I find, and one of the reasons why we started doing the show in the first place was that we're not limited to who can show up. We're only limited to who wants to watch.
Indeed.
And I think that's a wonderful thing because a lot of this music needs to get out there, and a lot of people haven't been exposed to it. And our guest today is somebody who's been on our show before and is a wonderful tuba player, Mr. Brad Moller. And thanks a lot for being here, man. We really appreciate it, and thank you for sharing some information with us. But first, let's start this thing off the right way with Mr. Brad Moller playing the Penderecki?
We'll get there.
Okay. Capriccio. So everybody enjoy, please. That was a wonderful rendition,
Beautiful.
Mr. Moeller, and thank you so much for sharing that with us today. For the rest of you out there, we're gonna be talking and breaking this whole piece down into tiny, tiny bits, and I'm actually looking forward to it. Doug?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being with us, Brad. Yeah, as I mentioned, Brad and I work together as a doctoral student, and this is your lecture recital at USC. The final requirement for your degree is a lecture recital after everything's been completed, after you've passed your exams, and it's basically your chance to show us what you know. And you chose this piece, the Capriccio of Krzysztof Penderecki, and I'd just love to turn it over to you right now. You can tell us about the piece and about your work with the piece and what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful. Thank you so much to John and Doug for hosting me today. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. You guys are absolutely incredible, and you do amazing work here, getting music that needs to be heard out to the masses. So, yes, this is my lecture recital for my DMA. I would say it's long overdue, and it's based off of work that I did for one of the culminating fields of my degree for a theory and analysis field. I had to pick a piece of music. I was just saying before the show that I actually wanted to do this on the 6 likes for solo tuba, a very, very obscure piece that is not well known, and ended up going a completely different direction with something that I think fits the standard of almost all tuba repertoire currently right now in the conservatory, in the college, and beyond that. So a lot of the work that I did for my analysis from a broad perspective is focused on the role of dissonance within Capriccio. Dissonance as it manifests itself in 4 different ways: structural dissonance, rhythmic dissonance, tonal dissonance, and timbral dissonance. How those play out throughout the piece has a huge impact on the way that a piece can be perceived by the listener, or the way that we can perform out.
Brad, do you mind if I interrupt for just a second?
Interrupt.
When it comes to dissonance and being a theory nut myself, I think a lot of people out there just assume that is what it is. And I think, can you kind of expound on that a little bit as to why a lot of composers went that way, as far as and why we refer to it as dissonant as opposed to just another idea, another sound?
Yeah, definitely. So the classical definition of dissonance, not classical by period, but classical like the way that we would understand it, would be essentially a pitch that lies outside the tonal scope of the piece of music that we're busy going. So if we have a tonic chord, it would be very unusual to have, a 2 or a minor 2 stuck over the top of it, at least for the classical period, for the Baroque period, and that shifts over time. As we enter into the modern and contemporary age, all tonality kind of gets explored very thoroughly. We stop being held in tonal ground, and it more becomes an issue of pitch centricity. And the idea of a pitch being outside, so if you have an F and suddenly it's you have an F sharp, that is no longer an issue of dissonance. That's more an expression of color within this pitch centricity. So composers took to other means of creating dissonance, taking a formal structure like sonata form and messing with it. In our case, with the Penderecki, we have rounded binary form, A-A-B-A. And the dissonance from a structural perspective is how Penderecki takes that expectation and breaks it apart. Just like you would expect these 5 pitches in any 5 chord, and a composer would add a dissonant note that messes with that. It's that same idea. We're taking this form that we know and we're breaking it.
So
yeah.
and not to interrupt again, Brad, but I guess where I'm going with this then is that in the modern age, if we really think about it, it isn't dissonant, right? I mean, I think that's an antiquated term now to refer to those things as such. And I can't remember what you said off the top of your head just a minute ago, but I found that term to be a lot pitch-centric.
Pitch centricity.
Yeah, pitch-centric. I find that to be much more pleasing and much more a great adjective to actually describe what's going on as opposed to dissonance. Because from a jazz idiom, we're always dealing with sharp 11s or flat 9s or flat 13s or any kind of that. And I find, especially my favorite thing is the major 7 sharp 11. I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful sound.
Yes.
And it's not dissonant to me.
Yeah.
And I think all of us out there should start thinking that it's not necessarily dissonant, it's just pitch-centric. And thank you for coming up with that term because and applying it that way, because that's a beautiful, beautiful realization, in my opinion. And I think also, too, where you were saying about when it comes to dissonant rhythmic things, it's not really dissonant, is it? It's more rhythmic-centric, right? So if you're going to walk that line, right?
I think at the heart, like if we get rid of the word dissonant, I wish I came up with pitch centricity, but it's an amazing term that it shows us how we've evolved past tonality, past atonality.
Well, not only evolution, but how these have evolved.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And if we want to, a different word than dissonant would be interest, right?
Okay, I love that, man.
So it's not, it's dissonant in a formal way, but in an informal way, if we think about like what is interesting rhythmically, it's that Penderecki takes dun 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 dun, and he goes dun dun da dee da da dee bop bop bom. He adds an extra eighth note. So it's these moments. Rather, if we recontextualize it away from dissonance, is interest, something that you go like, oh wow, okay, that's different, that's odd, that doesn't sit there, or maybe it does, but maybe that's interesting. This idea of catching one's attention, and that's done timbrally, rhythmically, structurally, and tonally. And it's all to do with expectation. And it's, as you say, with jazz chords, it's throwing a different color in there. It's creating something that stands out or that adds to in a new, different, interesting way. Yeah.
I think it's I mean, the term I was thinking of all during this was the term cognitive dissonance, because dissonance has taken it's transcended the musical realm where it began, and it just becomes something that attention or something that doesn't quite fit, and you have to look at it, So can you tell us, I mean, I have my own thoughts about this piece because I've taught it many times, but I've never gone into the depth of analysis that you have. I really caught that you said it is rounded binary.
Yes.
Which, okay, I agree, and that's pretty simple to see just by going through it. But can you tell us what holds this piece together? I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone who's going to teach this piece,
Yeah.
someone who's going to coach this piece, someone who's going to try to help a person learning this piece. The word is in philosophical circles is called, well, even liturgical circles is called an exegesis, which means
Yeah, good
leading out of.
Mm.
And it's usually applied to like scripture. You do an exegesis and you say, well, this is what the story actually means. So, well, I guess in a way, Penderecki is scripture for some of
Yeah.
us. So how did he do this? What's the piece made of?
Yeah. So from a basic standpoint, again, all familiar. It's made up of scales, fundamentally made up of scales. The two scales that are predominant, octatonic and chromatic. The A sections tend to be octatonic. The B section tends to be chromatic.
Can you, for those of us who don't know, can you really lay out the difference? Chromatic, I think that's pretty clear, all half steps. How does that differ from octatonic?
Yeah, wonderful. Octatonic as a scale can be made up in three different ways, but it's the compositional trait of the octatonic scale. The way it's built is only using half steps, whole steps, and minor thirds. So it's got this unique identifying characteristic that no matter which three consecutive pitches you use, it will always have that same combination of a half step, a whole step, and a minor third.
So then the difference, then can you expound upon the difference between, let's say, a diminished scale and an octatonic scale? Is there a difference?
From the simple perspective, much like a whole tone scale, much like an octatonic scale, would be this palindromic form, the idea that it continues to revolve using the same intervallic notation as you're going up. So with our normal modalities type of scales, it's not a repetition of sorts so much as it is a construction. In the octatonic scale, it's like these same three revolving things over, just like a whole tone scale. It would just be whole tone, whole tone, whole tone, whole tone. And it's that way that it's built makes it distinguishable because you're not really going anywhere. It could be used as a loop over and over again, and that's what we see in the Penderecki, in the Capriccio, is it's always moving. It's like a train that's just busy riding, and we never feel like we're like we've hit the, here's the leading tone, here's the thing. What we tend to feel is this sense of rolling through the piece from a scalar standpoint. So yeah, we have the A sections, the first, second, and fourth page. Are the octatonic material, and then the B section is our chromatic material. And aside from that, the other two things that stand out is pitch centricity, the importance between the tone F, the pitch F, and B flat. From a basic fundamental perspective, the piece starts in F, has a whole bunch of stuff that goes on, and then it ends in B flat. And it's just this dominant motion from F to B flat. And as the piece evolves, the pitch center moves. And it moves around, and it kind of ebbs and flows. And the further away it gets from F, the closer it gets to B flat, the more unstable the material becomes in that process. And by the end of the piece, it's breaking down completely. We have aleatoric, unnotated music. We have like crazy intervallic leaps. It's no longer this calm, we're plodding along. The music, in a sense, is breaking apart as that pitch center sits at F, wanting to go to B flat. And in my paper, I go through as the pitch centricity moves around. But from the basic level, we have F going to B flat.
Which is our favorite change.
Yes.
1 to 4, right?
Exactly.
I mean, we love that as human beings.
And Dr. 5-1.
And so that's your highest level Schenkerian analysis.
Yes.
F, B flat.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. And then the third thing that I think is really it caught me as being something that was very interesting is the prevalence of 3. The idea that dun, 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 a 3-note figure. Penderecki groups things in 3s for the entirety of the piece. We have pedal pitches. spontaneously that are all in groupings that are free. Bottom, 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 bum, 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 bum. That these groupings of threes are of importance. And the moment that he goes away from that and he only does two, right at the end, bum, bum, it stands out as being so interesting that this entire piece, this entire home is built on these repetitions. And then suddenly we get these moments where it's not. It's completely broken away from. And that was me just sitting with pages of music, just circling three notes in a row, like over and over and over again, and seeing that the majority of the piece is built that way. So those three things: the idea of scales, the idea of pitch, centricity, and the idea of threes. So yeah,
And we talked about this a little bit before the show here, how, when looking at a composer's work, how much of this is premeditated, how much of this is intuitive. From the composers I've worked with, I feel like usually it's an intuitive process where they, in a way, inhabit a language that they've created, and they may not be fully even interested in laying it out for you in terms of music theory. They're just like, well, that seemed right, and this was wrong, and I wonder if, do you have any sense of how Penderecki? Do you think he was a theoretician and this was all mapped out before, or it just felt right at the time?
As we were talking just a little bit before, and I kind of see three camps. I see the performer, the composer, and then me, the analyzer. And it's such a personal thing, analyzing music, because I come with all my biases and I see the patterns that I'm prone to seeing as we go through. A talking point for later is this idea of analysis within performance, however intuitive that is. But whether or not Penderecki was consciously aware of it, I remember looking through tempos of the piece. There are two tempos that guide us. There's the scherzo alla polacca, and then there is the waltz in the B section. And I did research. I wanted to know the history of them. I wanted to know the context of all of these different times, and finally put it all together. And then I saw an interview with Penderecki saying, anyone who puts any stock or any importance in the tempo clearly has no idea what's supposed to be happening. So that's me building the importance that perhaps for the composer was not something. It was a joke. It might have been something that he put in because it's a Polish reference to his heritage. Whether or not that was to be taken seriously or not, no. So that's the first instance that comes to mind. Is my analysis is oftentimes going to be separate and needs to be thought of as a separate entity from this is what the composer intended.
Well, I actually believe that any analysis by someone who didn't write anything is going to be personal.
Yeah.
And that, you can sit there and say, oh, no, he thought this and he thought that. No, unless you have a sit down with the composer, and even the composer might not even say, I don't know, it just sounded good to me. I just figured that. And if you want to call it that, cool. I mean, we in the jazz idiom, we talk about that a lot of times when we reharmonize or add things to songs or do that type of thing, where it's like, I swear, if one of the old composers for some of the tunes that I play all the time heard what we do with them, they would sit there and go, God, I wish I would have thought of that. That's pretty cool. But I think in the pedagogical world, everybody's always looking for that nth thing, that thing that codifies everything, and I think they're missing out on that because I don't think there is something to codify. Once again, it's music, and I think we need to keep that in mind, that music is personal, and that, like you were saying, as a teacher, when you're trying to teach this thing, it's your opinion, and you know what I'm saying, as far as that's concerned.
I do.
And your opinion is valid because you're a wonderful teacher and you're a wonderful musician. However, I've learned some pretty cool stuff from students that I go, God, I wouldn't have thought about it that way, and thank you for that, right? And I mean, so when you're digging into this type of thing, it's a personal issue for you to figure it out and hopefully play better. Now, did you have a chance to talk to to him at all? Or?
No, I did not. That's very, very unfortunate. He just passed in 2020, so it would have been such a privilege. This idea of analysis being something that is intensely personal is exactly why I started down this process. I started formally analyzing my pieces about 6 months before I met Doug about 6 years ago. I was playing competitions. I was doing solo competitions. I was doing auditions, and I started having like questions of like, how do I address these? How should this be played? And as much as teachers have their own, like, this is the way that I do it, I wanted to be able to bring in my thoughts, my personality, my ideas into that perspective. Not to say that anyone is right or wrong, and there are people who are amazing players and amazing at doing their analysis. And it's more this idea of like encouraging and opening a dialogue for every person to feel like if you have something to say about the piece, to say it, right? And taking that idea of, it is intensely personal. For me personally, I want to see that personality out there. I want to have discussions about pieces and about the meaning, and let that influence myself and my peers and my colleagues in kind of in this common direction of learning more and being engaged more with the pieces. And so it is, yeah.
I think as a musician, and I try to teach this myself, but you should always know what it is you're playing and why you're playing it. And it doesn't matter whether it's an excerpt or a solo or this thing or the other thing. You should always be, and I think you're right, because that becomes that personal analysis thing. So when you are playing the ride, or when you're playing whatever it is that you're playing, you should know exactly why and where you sit. And by looking at it that way from an analytical standpoint, I think you actually can play it better.
Yeah.
And you can understand it better.
Agreed. And that's definitely one of the questions I bring to my students. It's like, what, I feel like until you have an understanding, kind of like the composer, like why is every note on the page and what are you going to do with it and what does it mean? Until you get there, you still have some work to do. But what you mentioned an intensely personal version of this piece, and I can think of no more intentionally personal recording of this piece than the Zdzisław Piernik recording, which, I was lucky. I heard Zdzisław Piernik play in 1978 in Los Angeles. Roger Bobo brought him to the tuba conference at USC, and he played this concert that Zdzisław Piernik is a wonderful Polish tuba player. He's still working in performance art. I think he's in his 70s now, and he's still doing it. But he was in his prime then, and Roger brought him so we could see. I guess Roger had seen him in Warsaw. Zdzisław Piernik had a nightclub act in Warsaw. It was just him and the tuba on stage, and he came on. He put the Barry sax mouthpiece in there and the trumpet mouthpiece, and he was the man. I mean, it was electric. It was totally unique that no one else has ever done anything like that. But he recorded this piece, and I don't know if it's true, if it was written for him, or if he was Poland's preeminent tubist in the 1980 when the piece appeared. But the piece is it's different than most people in our country play it, and I usually present it to my students saying, okay, you need to hear this. That performance, which is pretty wild, did that change your perspective on the piece at all? Yeah,
so in the same way that Penderecki is saying after all the analysis, if you take time seriously, you've missed the point. The most that I know about his performance is when Penderecki was composing, he had this idea of Piernik's approach and sound, and that's who he was composing for, not specifically for, but he had that idea in mind. And for anyone that hasn't heard the recording, it is one of the most unique approaches to the Penderecki, to the Capriccio that you've ever heard. He does things that I've never heard performed by anybody, and again, it brings me back to this idea that he had ideas, and he made like conscious decisions about what he was engaging with, and then executed that. And it might not be my style, might not be somebody else's style, but it's essentially getting this individualistic, like this is my interpretation, going for it. And so as much as it might be the antithesis of what my analysis has to do with. It's almost that exact same dialogue of having something to say, having that unique perspective on how to perform the piece.
After you completed this analysis where you've pretty much mapped out the technical approach to the piece, the sounds to use, octatonic versus chromatic, did it mesh with your intuition of the piece, or did it cause drastic changes in your interpretation?
It shifted quite a few things that I was doing at the time. First off, I had always performed on the 1980 edition, which I think is the popular edition, and today I performed on the 1987 edition that has adjustments made by the publisher and Penderecki to better suit what was the original composition. And it's got some different times, some different feelings, and again, that idea of rhythmic interest or rhythmic dissonance, it plays into that even more. We have more examples of it. So what I found is I was being too dramatic personally with every single note. And I was losing this idea of lines. I was losing this idea of scales and threes. I just kind of played. And like note by note, and whatever comes out, comes out. And it switched that around to being conscious of movement, conscious of feel, conscious of timbre.
Would you say that your prior approach to this piece was more melodic, expressive, and emotional?
Yeah, it's almost entirely instinctual, melodic, based on expression.
So there actually is a phraseology to it then.
I think, much like the Croft Encounters, the Penderecki, there is an intuitive way that people just approach it. They understand it, and they express it at like a intuitive, instinctual level. And that's how I performed before doing the analysis. And it's not to say that it's wrong at all. It's to say that I found a lot more to do with the piece than I had before.
Well, when I hear students play this for me, and sometimes they play it note perfectly, but I'm kind of I can't say what I want to, which is, you're missing so many details of this piece. I mean, you have to say, well, what are the intervals? What is the piece made of? What's happening here? What's the form of the piece? What is the architecture of the piece? And I do think that's equally as important as how it feels to you, and perhaps even more so. And I think having this, you've got some authority in suggesting that people at least give this a thought.
Yeah.
But I think you're also saying that however it's performed, the aesthetic of the piece comes out. I wanted to make this point. I cannot think of Polish music without thinking of Witold Lutosławski, and the piece that swept him to fame in 1961, which was Venetian Games, and that was presented to me in a theater class. It's an aleatoric orchestral piece, but quite compelling. And I did some work on that piece, and the thing that I came away from was the fact that even the aleatoric sections are based on what he called a vertical aggregate. So even though the notes happen as they happen, as at that moment as the players decide, and the aesthetic at the time was that we were giving control back to the players and taking it away from the performer. But the performer retains ultimate control over which notes are played, and that would be the vertical aggregate, and it changes. And that was the composer's choice, which gives the trajectory to the piece. And I think I just cannot think that a Polish composer would write a piece without having that in mind.
Yeah, it's the way that plays out for me is actually on figure 10 as these ideas of the aleatoric parts in this piece, the play higher, play lower, the gliss right at the end of the piece. They are such crucial moments in deciding that trajectory to the piece that it really gives it to the performer to say, how do you want this to sound? How do you want this to feel? For me personally, I want it to be like a build up, that every A section breaks like a little bit more than the previous one. And so that final one, I'm not even glissing, I'm just ripping up and down as it goes through.
Loved it.
And if if someone really wanted to push it, the higher, the lower parts, just the arrows that you see, if you want to break down with the music as well, right? You don't even have to play notes. A lot of the performances, it's like you want to play this note, this note, this note just perfectly. The other side of that would be just go crazy and break down with the piece as it goes down. And that's that feeling of giving portions of that musical control back over to the performer. I feel like that's kind of where it's found in a piece like this.
Do you think it's really, though, giving back, or is it part of the deconstruction that is built into the piece? And maybe he had that idea where it's just like, I'm taking one brick out piece by piece, and that at the end I don't have any bricks left. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Right?
Can I add a little package to that great card?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay. That question is coming at you, but also, can you also say, how does this piece fit into the stream of Penderecki's works? I mean, and is he an avant-garde composer? Is this an avant-garde piece? I was lucky enough to work with him for a week at the Orkenbach Festival. We premiered his Credo. And I remember him sitting out in the audience and yelling directions to the orchestra. And then every afternoon he was at this Italian restaurant drinking wine. I mean, he had a good time. And I regret to this day that I never spoke to him. But he did not impress me as a particularly avant-garde composer.
Yeah. To first address John, when I perform this, I think of the piece breaking. I think of it falling apart. And as the notation gets less and less and the intervals get wider, I think of it in a similar way. As it's being torn down. And that for me personally is what the aleatoric, the unnotated things have to do with. Is it's essentially saying the music can no longer be confined. It is like it's destroying itself. That's how I feel about that.
From a compositional standpoint, I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of composers throughout history have tried to get that emotion, get that type of sound across where it just diminishes and diminishes and diminishes. And here we have a composer that actually pulls it off. In such a unique fashion, especially for such an instrument, where we're always rooted in the concrete, because that's what tuba's for. Is that we're the foundation. It's got to be there. It's got to be. And here we are. And this one, you just get to sit there and go and just kind of just do different stuff. And I think what Doug brings up is that I don't consider that to be avant-garde by any means. I just consider that to be cool music and cool composition. And once again, it's like when we were talking about dissonance, can we really, really say that anything is avant-garde anymore? I mean, what is avant-garde these days as far as music is concerned? I mean, it's once again, our ears have gotten to a point to where we accept all this other type of things. Our eyes have seen all kinds of new things, right? And now, what is truly avant-garde? It's just different now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes down to it, I mean, that's kind of my take on it. I mean,
So to jump in there. Within the perspective of avant-garde, presently that's true, but looking at Penderecki in his time, the avant-garde movement being like a quintessentially different idea, when we look at a piece like this, as crazy as it seems, with all of these leaps, all of these jumps, and it seems so crazy, when it's boiled down to scales, pitches, it is simple. There's nothing like it, not groundbreaking in what it brought to the tuba, but it's definitely not what we would consider within that movement of being avant-garde. And when you hear the Polish Requiem, when you hear his Third Symphony, you hear that very, I would not call it a classical style, but a traditional, very like sticking with what is like basic or fundamental, right? That it's not that avant-garde movement style. As much as it seems crazy, it really is grounded in simplicity from a compositional standpoint.
Agreed. Agreed.
Well, I hate to say this, but we're kind of running out of time today, and I would really like it if you would ask like the last 2 questions or something, if that's cool with you.
My last question is this: your paper on this was so thorough and exhaustive, and unlike, there are personal interviews with Penderecki, and there's a correction of errata, which are extremely important, and I know they factored in, but I don't think there's been a thorough intervallic structural analysis like you did. And you have, as I understand, made it available to colleagues if they...
Yes. Anyone who's contacted me that is interested in it, I've sent it out as an email. I'm happy to give it out to anyone, Facebook, maybe like YouTube comments. It doesn't bother me at all. The entire point of this analysis is to inspire dialogue, and by taking the piece, and I have all the analysis with all the notes, all the octatonic scales, and then all the language as well that kind of goes over what each of it means. That was part of what I set out to do, and I was inspired by Brandon Davis, who opted to do an analysis for the Croft Encounters. And when I started playing this more for competitions, I thought, why isn't it being done for this? So yes, available to anyone who wants a copy. I know Doug has one. I'll send one to John, and anyone can email any of us and get a copy at any point.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming in and talking to us today and playing for us, Brad. I wish we had some more time for this, but if I was one of your DMA guys, I'd give you your piece of paper right now. So, but I want to thank you again. Doug, do you have any last thoughts, man?
Congratulations, Dr. Moller.
Yeah, most definitely. Hey, we're going to be back in the first of the year, and we want to thank you for watching us this year. And what a great way to end 2021 with this conversation and this piece. And from Doug and myself, thanks for watching Conical Supremacy, and we'll see you the first of the year. Everybody have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.